Hello, friends. It's good to be with you again. This episode of the podcast is airing on a Saturday, which means that tomorrow, Sunday, we will be gathering again for our virtual or digital worship at 9:45 in the morning. Tomorrow's service is actually a somewhat special one. It's the Festival of Pentecost, which is one of the important festivals of the church year. And I want to just say a word about the way that the church year is structured. We are a tradition that has seasons of the year. And for me, I've always found that to be helpful as a way to sort of mark time. And actually, maybe during this time of pandemic, I might mention, you've heard the word Blur's Day, how all the days blur into one another and it's hard to know if it's Monday or Wednesday or Friday. One of the things, in all seriousness, we've heard from the members of St. Philip the Deacon is that our live stream worship service on Sunday and also our daily morning prayer services, as well as a few of the other weekly events we have, the Coffee with Pastors and so forth, has created some anchors in the week for them in the midst of those Blur's days. And that's one of the ways to think about the seasons of the church year as well. It sort of creates some markers along the way for us to reflect on our lives in the context of the bigger story that all of us are part of, which is, of course, God's story. So I want to just refresh our memory briefly here on the seasons of the church year. And again, one helpful way I have reflected on them. The church year begins, we've talked about this before, not on January 1st, which is when the secular calendar of the year begins, but rather it begins with the first Sunday of Advent. So we have 4 weeks leading up in the season of Advent to then the next season of the church year, which is Christmas. Christmas is, of course, when we celebrate the birth of Jesus. After Christmas, we get Epiphany. Epiphany, the sort of symbol of Epiphany is light. It's when we talk about Jesus being spread or shared with the nations. And then after a little break, we get to the season of Lent, which at St. Philip the Deacon we missed a lot of this year, sadly, and all those beautiful Wednesday evening services during Lent with Holden evening prayer. But Lent, of course, brings us up to Holy Week, and then ultimately to Easter, which is the high point of the church year. And we come to the end of Easter with the season of Pentecost. So you will have noticed that all of those seasons I just mentioned in the first half of the church year are all about the story of Jesus, his birth, his life, his ministry, his suffering, his death, and his resurrection. With Pentecost, again, I already mentioned that it is sometimes called the birthday of the church year. We move from the story of Jesus now to the story of the church, where the Holy Spirit has been poured out on those first believers. And basically, through the Holy Spirit, Jesus is saying, now it's your turn. And for us, living in the year 2020, the way I think about both, or I guess the interaction between the first half of the church year and the second half of the church year is this. We have heard now the story of Jesus, of what he's done for us, of his great love for us. And now in the second half of the church year, we get to ask the very important question, now what? In light of hearing that story once again, how am I going to live? How are we going to live? How are we going to continue to share God's love? Or in the context of the mission statement here at St. Philip the Deacon, how are we going to continue to reach out, inspire, and proclaim? I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for our Sunday morning worship, and I'll look forward to seeing you again next week for the next episode of this podcast. In the meantime, thanks for joining us, and as always, be well, stay in touch, and God bless.